Augmentation Evoker. It's WoW's first support class, and it utilizes the power of the black and bronze dragonflights, weaving in magic to alleviate our allies and do damage to our enemies. So how are we going to play it? Well, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know in a beginner-friendly manner, while also giving veterans watching everything they need to know too. Let's start off with our stat priority. So the primary stat we want on our gear is going to be intellect, and this is going to increase the damage and healing of our spells. As long as you're getting a higher and higher eye level of gear, you don't need to worry too much about the secondary stats. Getting a higher eye level is 99% of the time going to be an upgrade for you. Speaking of the secondary stats though, the secondary priority you want to follow loosely is here. What does versatility do? Well, that's going to increase damage and healing done while also reducing damage taken. So with our mastery, when we use certain spells, which I will be showing you, we can actually increase our allies' versatility. And we can actually increase it by a higher amount for the more mastery we have. The duration of Shifting Sands, Breath of Aeons, and your other helpful auras are also increased by a higher percentage for the more mastery we have. So TLDR then, the more mastery we have, the more we're going to be able to help our allies out and increase their stats, etc. Haste increases our attack speed and spell casting speed. Let's say if I use Living Flame here, you can see it's casting on 1.9 seconds. More haste will shorten that cast time, and any dots or damage over time effects on our enemies will tick over, doing damage even quicker. Mastery is unique to every single spec. For us, it's called Time Walker. Casting an Empower spell, which I'll go over shortly in the rotation, grants Shifting Sands to one ally, preferring damage dealers, increasing their versatility. Critical Strike increases the chance to do double damage and healing. Looking then at the set bonus that we're getting in Season 1, Upheaval deals more damage and increases the damage of your next 2 eruption casts, and Ebon Might increases primary stats by an additional amount of your own every 2 seconds it remains active. Again, if you don't know what these are, don't worry, I'll be going through it all in a lot of detail for you shortly. So now we're going to be looking at some of the utilities and cooldowns and defensives that we have available to us as an evoker in TheWarWithin. So on the left here, this action bar, these are abilities that we're using to debilitate our enemies. And on the right, these ones are actually there to enhance us and our allies. So let's start off with what we're doing to our enemies then. Well, first up, we've got Sleepwalk. You can see how I'm casting this. Disorienting an enemy for 20 seconds, causing them to sleepwalk around you, and damage has a chance, so it's not a guarantee, to also awake them. Then we have Landslide. You can see I can point this wherever I want, making a landslide, conjuring a path of shifting stone towards the target location. Rooting enemies for 15 seconds that are caught with it, but damage again may cancel the root. Then we have Oppressing Roar. Any enemies caught in the cone that is emitted from the suppressing roar will actually have the duration of any crowd control placed upon them increased by 50%. So if you root them for 10 seconds and then use that, they're then going to be rooted for another 5 seconds, therefore 15 seconds, for example. And it will be for any crowd control applied to them in the next 10 seconds when you use Oppressing Roar. And lastly, we have Quell. This is your interrupt, otherwise known as a kick. And this is what we use to interrupt our enemies' spellcasting. It is extremely important to use this, and beginners and veterans alike often do overlook the importance of interrupting the enemy's spellcasting, whether that be in raiding, PvP, or Mythic Plus. Moving over then to the defensives and utilities we have to help us and our allies, we have Obsidian Scales. And you can see here I've got 2 charges of this at the moment. Reinforce your scales, reducing damage taken by 30% for 12 seconds. That's just a core defensive that we have. We then have Blessing of the Bronze. You should put this on before combat. It can be placed on you, your party, and your raid. And by that, I do mean that if you place it on yourself or just press the button, when you're in a party or a raid, it will also apply to everybody in that group. And what this does is, it reduces the cooldown of any major movement abilities that your allies and you have by 15% for an entire hour. We then have another huge one, Fury of the Aspects. This is your Bloodlust or Heroism. Basically, This is going to increase the haste of all party and raid members by 30% for 40 seconds, and is generally considered the biggest cooldown in the game. Other classes also have it, and you can see I now have the exhaustion debuff. Now, if a mage uses their version, or a shaman uses their version, it does then mean that everyone has the debuff, and you can't then use yours. It is shared between the entire raid group. We have rescue, which I kind of can show you, but not really. You swoop to an ally and fly with them to a target location. So I can say this is where I want to fly to, and I click my ally or their raid frame, and I will rescue them to that location, taking them out of wherever, whatever they're in. And lastly, we have Cauterizing Flame. This is one of the best debuff removers in the game. You're going to cauterize an ally's wounds, removing any bleed, poison, curse, and disease effects, and healing them if it removes any effect. A lot of classes can remove like magic and disease, etc., but only very few can actually remove bleed effects. And this is why the Evoker is so amazing with their Cauterizing Flame. Now, you can choose other talents in your Evoker tree, and there are other bits and bobs in the Evoker spellbook, like Expunge, or I don't know, there's a few others that you can look through. But I don't want to overwhelm you in this video, and these are the main ones that I think you really need to be aware of if you weren't already. Now let's actually see how it all comes together for us Augmentation Evokers in PvP. So the main thing it's actually going to revolve around, or in fact before that, we've got a few things here. We've got some kind of defensives and healing, damage and enhancements, and then utility. And then some cooldowns, etc. over here that we're going to be going through. So the main thing we're going to be using is Ebon Might. Increase your 4 nearest allies' primary stat by 5% of your own, and cause you to deal a lot more damage for 10 seconds. It can only affect 4 allies at once and prefers to do damage dealers. Now, the important bit here is that Eruption, Breath of Eons, and Empower spells extend that duration. So, what ones are we going to be using? Well, we have our Eruption here. Cause a violent eruption beneath an enemy's feet, dealing volcanic damage split between them. Increases the duration of your active Ebon Might by 1 second. We then have what I mentioned as an Empower spell, and that's this here, Upheaval. You can see here, it says 1, 2, 3, and 4 at 3, 6, 9, and 12 yard radius. So depending on the radius needed, you can just do it at 1. Click to use it, and then click again to release it at the Empower you want. Gather earthen power beneath your enemy's feet and send them hurtling upwards, dealing damage. And it'll just do it in a bigger radius the longer you hold it, basically. Increases again the duration of your active Ebon Might by 2 seconds. So if you only need it in a small area and they're not moving, then just do it at Empower 1. If there's multiple enemies, maybe you'll do it at a higher radius. And the really only way I can say this is that you're going to get used to the radiuses you need to do it at once you use this a bit more. Because saying how big that radius is by numbers is all nice and that, but you really kind of have to see it and get used to how big you need it to be. Generally, 1 or 2 is probably going to be fine where your enemies are. Then we have Living Flame. This is kind of a filler spell. Send a flickering flame towards your target, dealing fire damage. It is a filler. However, you can see it's procced something here, and this is called Essence Burst. Your Living Flame has a chance, and your Azure Strike, which I'll show you shortly, has a chance to make your next 2 eruptions. Not next 2. Your next eruption costs no essence, but it stacks 2 times. So with our eruption, you'll notice that it says 2 essence, and that is down here, essence. We generally regenerate it passively, and when we get a proc on our off our Living Flame, so when we use Living Flame, it can proc Essence Burst, and that'll make there you go, our next eruption free of essence. So we're not going to use any essence to actually cast it. Then we have Breath of Eons. This is also going to increase the duration of your active Ebon Might effects by 5 seconds, but it is on a 2 second, 2-minute cooldown. Taking a deep breath and fly to the targeted location, spewing molten cinders in your path. Removes all root effects from yourself, and you're immune to any movement impairments while flying. And again, that is going to increase the active duration of Ebon Might. And remember, Ebon Might is going to be on you and, well, your near forest allies. Azure Strike, again, can proc things. This is going to be used while moving because it's instant, so it's just a quick way of getting damage out. And one thing we are going to proc sometimes, if you see your Living Flame proc, is this Burnout proc. Your next Living Flame's cast time is completely reduced to be instant. And then those instant ones, of course, can then proc a essence-free eruption. Before the gates open, make sure you use Blessing of the Bronze. Weave the Threads of Time, reducing the cooldown of major movement abilities for your party and raid members. Looking at the other cooldowns we have Time Skip, Surge Forward in Time, causing your cooldowns to recover 1,000% faster. So use that like after Breath of Eons, etc. Tip the Scales, compress time to make an next empowered spell cast instantly. So we can use that and then make things like Upheaval, just cast instantly and at the maximum radius. Time Spiral, allowing you and your enemies to cast their major movement ability in the next 10 seconds, even if it's on cooldown. And of course, Fear of the Aspects, which is our Bloodlust, increasing massively our haste for us and our enemies. Use this, coordinate with your allies when they're going to use their burst damage. Then looking at the healing we can do, we've got Cauterizing Flame on a minute cooldown, removing any bleed, poison, curse, disease effects, and healing them, which is the best dispel in the game, in my opinion. A smaller version of that, Expunge, on an 8-second cooldown, so a lot quicker, will just remove all poison effects. We can then use Emerald Blossom on a 30-second cooldown to do some healing, grow a bulb from the Emerald Dream at the allies' location, and then healing 3 injured allies within that area. Living Flame, of course, can be used to do some damage. And then we've got Blistering Scales on a 30-second cooldown, protecting the ally, as you can see here, with Blistering Scales, increasing their armor by 30% of our own. Melee attacks against them will cause scales to explode, dealing damage to the attacker. Put this on an ally if they're getting bursted or targeted, etc. And it can only be placed on one target at a time, of course. And then we've just got some utilities that we can use. Hover, basically launching yourself up and gaining movement speed. Rescue, get an ally and swoop with them to a target location. Again, if your ally is being targeted, we can kind of rescue them out of there. Landslide we can use in a path, as you can see, and that is going to root enemies that are hit by it. Oppressing Roar is going to increase the duration of crowd control effects on your enemies. You can use this, with landslides. You can use it when your enemies are using theirs, allies are using theirs. And then we've got Quell, which is actually going to interrupt your enemies as well. Lastly, we have Sleepwalk, disorienting your enemies for 20 seconds, and then Verdant Embrace, flying to an ally and healing them. You can also use this on yourself where you won't fly anywhere. And that really is the main things we're going to do. So we've got a few kind of healing and ally enhancing abilities, a lot of damage dealing, which will actually work with your Ebon Might to enhance your allies, and then some cooldowns, again enhancing our allies, and then some utilities. For the PvP talents we'll be using, Born in Flame is a fantastic one. Casting Ebon Might grants 2 charges of Burnout, reducing the cast on a Living Flame, so you instantly get 2 charges of instant Living Flames, which can proc Essence Bursts, etc., or just doing some damage. And Nullifying Shroud is another fantastic one on a 1.5 minute cooldown. It's a new cooldown we will get. Reef yourself in Arcane Energy, preventing the next 3 full loss of control effects against you. Another one I love is then Dream Projection, summoning a flying projection of yourself that heals allies you pass through, detonating and dispelling any magical effects on your allies, as well as healing them. And that is it for the the PvP talents. Now let's move on to the hero talents, which will, by the way, be Scale Commander. So for this Augmentation Evoker build, we are going with Scale Commander hero talents, and I'm going to touch on these briefly. If you are a beginner to the class and you find this bit overwhelming, don't worry. This is all already included in the rotation I have shown you, and I just want to go into the hero talents and give you a bit of background for those who want it, kind of what's going on and why we're taking them. So we're starting off with Mass Eruption. Empower spells cause your next eruption to strike up to 3 targets. When striking less than 3 targets, eruption damage is increased for each missing target. So basically just doing some, damage when we use our Empower spells. On the left, any black spells deal more damage. Breath of Eons cause enemies to take more damage from bombardment. And that's actually this talent here, Bombardments. It's weird that they didn't put this at the top, considering it's affecting other talents. But anyway, increased damage from bombardments and essence abilities for 12 seconds. And then what we've got here, Obsidian Scales reduces damage by an additional amount, which is the one I like to go for because it's great. So talking about bombardments then, Mass Eruption marks your primary target for destruction for the next 6 seconds, and you and your allies, because of course we are augmentation, have a chance to trigger a bombardment when attacking those marked targets, dealing massive volcanic damage between them and any nearby enemies as well. Just some passive chances from you and your allies attacking to deal big volcanic damage. Wing Leader, bombardments reduce the cooldown of Breath of Eons for each target struck. And then another choice where basically your bombardments can generate an essence burst as well. On the right, entering combat grants you a charge of burnout, causing your next living flame to cast instantly. That's quite nice, but it's only happening when we go into combat. Each second you're in combat, Azure Strike, Living Flame, and Eruption deal more damage. And then another utility spell here, while hovering, damage taken is reduced from area of effect spells, and I quite like that one. Lastly, Breath of Eons can now be steered in your desired direction. This is actually really cool. In addition, Breath of Eons burns targets for vampiric... vampiric? What? The word's coming out my mouth. I literally just do not know. For volcanic damage over 12 seconds. Not vampiric damage. Oh my god. I think I've got, like, Stan Lane, Blood Death Knight thing, talents on the brain. Is what happens when you film too much. Yeah, so basically, just to recap on what the hell is going on with this talent, Breath of Eons can now be steered, and Breath of Eons also burns targets for volcanic damage as well, so doing an extra dot of damage over time on your target. Finally, looking at the consumables we're going to be using, you will notice these Nerubian gem weavers. First off, looking at enchants and what we're adding to our gear. So these are the new weekly vault items where you can add a socket to your gear on the head, wrist, and waist. And you'll also see Magnificent Jeweler's settings. You can add 2 to your neck and each ring, and this is adding 2 sockets to each piece of jewelry. Chant of Winged Grace on the back is going to be an avoidance and lessening of fall damage enchant. Crystalline Radiance will be primary stat. Avoidance on the wrist. Sunset Spellthread gives primary stat and also stamina on the legs. Scout's March is the movement speed on the boots that you'd come to expect. Putting Mastery on the rings, you can put haste or crit depending on your exact circumstances with your secondary stats and stat priority, especially if you're simulating your character, but generally, Mastery, etc. is going to be fine. And then the Authority of Radiant Power is going to be on your weapon enchant. Basically, sometimes when you're doing damage, you will do an extra amount of radiant damage on your target and also increase your secondary stat by about 1,700 for... I don't know how long. It just says temporarily on the tooltip of the enchant. But there we go. So sorry about that. Actually, haven't got a bloody clue. And then on the consumables, I would just go for the Tempered Versatility, personally, over the Mastery Flask. It's just a more general increase on both damage and defensives. Feasts, obviously, are the best option. And then Tempered Potion will increase your secondary stats. Specifically, it's going to increase the one that isn't being used on your flask. Healing Potion is your healing potion. Mana Oil can add crit and haste. I would go with the Algari Mana Oil. That's what adds crit and haste. Crystallized Augment Rune increases primary stat. And then the gems are a bit interesting. Culminating Blasphemite. It actually adds primary stat, but it also will add a little bit of critical effect per different coloured gem you're using. So if you use, like here, an Onyx, a Ruby, an Emerald, and a Sapphire, you'll get 0.60% critical effect, whereas if you only use one colour, you'll only get 15. So you do want to use all 4 colours, and then after that, use whichever colours you would like, depending on your stat priority. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in TheWarWithin Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in TheWarWithin as well. I am doing all classes and specs for TheWarWithin, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for TheWarWithin Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the plater profiles, the voodoo, the LVUI, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.